Buffalo Trace is a name that makes bourbon lovers pause and take notice. A distillery at the center of some of the most sought-after bottles in the world. Innovation, tradition, and prestige, all under one roof. But for much of its history, this distillery worked quietly in the background, its whiskey known only to those who sought it out. What happened next turned Buffalo Trace into one of the most trend-setting distilleries in the bourbon world, and it all started right here. This is the story of Buffalo Trace. Before Kentucky was bourbon country, before Buffalo Trace was known around the world, this bend in the Kentucky River was a meeting place where life, both wild and human, crossed paths for generations. Long before a single barrel rolled here, the land itself was shaping the future.
So this was a buffalo crossing here. The buffalo came through on their way to the Great Plains, and they crossed the Kentucky River. And over hundreds of years, millions of buffalo crossed through here. So that's what this land was before that.
When settlers arrived, they saw more than just untamed wilderness. They saw fertile bottomland, rich in limestone filtered water, perfect for crops. Corn was easy to grow here, but harder to move without spoiling. Turning it into whiskey solved two problems at once. It preserved the grain, and it created something of even greater value.
Well, whiskey was currency back in the frontier life. A lot of farmers moved out here from the east, and they grew corn, and there was so much corn that they grew, they had to sell this corn. So they didn't have money, they didn't have cash, so whiskey was the currency.
In a world with little paper money and fewer banks, a barrel of whiskey could buy tools, trade for livestock, or even settle debts. A farmer's reputation might rest not only on the quality of his grain, but on the character of his whiskey. But land and grain weren't enough to build an industry. Location was everything, and Frankfort had it all.
Frankfort was the capital of Kentucky, so there were politicians here, businessmen, and right next to the Kentucky River. And the Kentucky River right here makes a sharp 90-degree turn, so it slows the river up. So this is the perfect place to form a bourbon distillery, because it was a good place the boats could dock and load these boats up with the barrels and bring supplies in.
Add the arrival of the railroad, and this quiet crossing became a crossroads of power, politics, and trade. From here, whiskey could flow out of the markets near and far downriver to the Ohio, up to the Mississippi, and from there to the world. By the mid-1800s, distilleries dotted the banks of the Kentucky River. Many would rise and fall, but this stretch of land, with its pure water, fertile soil, and prime position, would outlast them all.
Like I said earlier, buffalo came through here to go on their way to the Great Plains, and they formed paths that were called traces when they came through here. There's a lot of history behind these traces because of the settlers that came into these areas.
2 centuries later, you can still walk the same ground where buffalo carved their trail, settled or staked their future, and bourbon found its first foothold. Next time, we'll meet Daniel Swigert, the man who took this land from legend to livelihood and planted the first seeds of a bourbon empire. In this series, we'll uncover the story of Buffalo Trace Distillery, not just as a brand, but as a living thread through the history of bourbon itself. From the bold first builders, to the visionaries who risked everything, to the modern era of innovation and revival. we'll meet Daniel Swigert, the man who built one of the earliest distilleries on this site in the 1850s, back when bourbon was still taking shape. We'll see how E.H. Taylor Jr. transformed bourbon making, championing quality, pioneering new techniques, and even pushing for legislation that defined what real whiskey should be. Then came George T. Stagg, a businessman who rescued the distillery from collapse and built it into a powerhouse. Where Taylor chased perfection, Stagg built an empire. We'll uncover how Buffalo Trace survived America's darkest years for bourbon, Prohibition. While thousands of distilleries shut down forever, this place kept its stills running. We'll meet Albert Blanton, who steered the distillery through the Great Depression and beyond. He built Warehouse H, a metal-clad warehouse that changed the way bourbon aged and planted the seed for the single-barrel movement. From there, Elmer T. Lee took the vision further at a time when bourbon was in decline. He created the world's first single-barrel bourbon, Blanton's, a risk that changed the industry forever. We'll see how Sazerac's purchase in the 1990s brought new life, rebuilding the site, expanding production, and putting Buffalo Trace at the center of the bourbon renaissance. From the antique collection to the global bourbon boom, this place became a trendsetter. In this series, you'll see how Buffalo Trace didn't just survive, it led. From early distillers to bourbon's modern icons, from near collapse to global recognition, this land has carried every era of the bourbon story, and it's still writing new chapters today. This is Buffalo Trace, the distillery that became a legend.